Good day everyone. Our report is all about power supply. Power supply. The provisions set out below are minimum terms and conditions that are required to be part of every power supply agreement or PSA executed by the distribution utilities or DU with generation companies or GenCo. Number 1. Parties. The parties should clearly identify seller and buyer. Seller, generation and company. Buyer, distribution company. Number 2. Recitals. The recitals should set scope purpose of the PSA, which is the sale by the seller of electricity to the buyer and the purchase by the buyer of electricity from the seller. Number 3. Term or contract period. The date of effectivity of PSA. The effective date of PSA may differ depending on whether the seller is a new project or existing project and depending of the commencement of the supply. The parties may distinguish from an effective date, signing date, and commercial operations date. Term of contract period of PSA. The parties' agreement in the relation if extension or renewal of PSA. Number 4. Effective date, commercial operation date, and condition precedent. The common condition precedent include corporate approvals, government authorizations including ERC approval, and payment security. Number 5. Seller's obligations. Beginning on the effective date until its termination, the seller should supply and deliver the contract capacity and contract energy. Number 6. Buyer's obligations. Buyer's obligations is to purchase electricity from the seller. Instances where buyer will not buy due to event of force majeure, effect of buyer, and curtailment. Number 7. WESM operation. The operation may differ on the whether it's WESM environment and WESM non-environment. WESM environment usually consists of protocols on year ahead, month ahead, week ahead, and day ahead. Number 8. Transmission and interconnection. Seller has entered into a process of a connection agreement and transmission service agreement with the NGCP to connect the plant to grid. Number 9. Outages. Scheduled outages. The seller is allowed scheduled outages not to exceed the number of days as set forth in schedule. Average is 30 days for each contract year, during which times reduced or no deliveries will be available to the buyer. Forced outages. The seller is allowed forced outages not to exceed the number of days as set forth in schedule. Average is 15 days for each contract year, during which times reduced or no deliveries will be available to the buyer. Number 10. Replacement power or backup power. Provision sets out the agreement of the parties with regard to the procurement, payment of replacement power and backup power in case of outages, the procedure and notice requirements, and the cost of replacement power and backup power. Number 11. Regulatory approval. The obligations of the seller to sell and deliver the electricity to the buyer, hereunder and subject to the parties having obtained all required governmental approvals and permit, including without limitation with respect to the buyer, any required approvals from the ERC or the WESM. Number 12. Change in law. Buyer and the seller acknowledge that given the ongoing evolution of the WESM and regulations governing the electricity market, there may be circumstances that require the parties to amend this agreement. Number 13. Reduction of contract capacity on account of RCOA. The parties shall agree on and prepare the protocol to implement the reduction in the amount of contracted capacity as a result of the implementation of retail competition and open access.
So, good day everyone. This is the continuation of the report of power supply. So, number 14, which is the payment security. This provision refers to the agreement of the parties with respect to payment security and other forms of security. Number 15, which is the force majeure. This provision sets out the concept and instances of force majeure, effects of force majeure to the obligation of the seller and the buyer, the provision of replacement during force majeure, effect of uninsured events of force majeure, and effect of extended force majeure. Number 16, which is the events of default. This provision sets out the events when the buyer or seller may be considered in default of their obligations under this agreement. Number 17, which is the termination. It is the agreement of the parties as to the events that will cause termination of the agreement and the consequences of termination, as well as the procedure for termination. Number 18, which is liquidated and damages. Upon the occurrence of default, the non-defaulting party shall be entitled to liquidated damages. Number 19, which is the billing and payment. The procedure for billing and payment, including procedures for any disputes between buyer and seller in relation to billing and payment, should be described in this provision and should be include number 1, no offsetting. Number 2, no withholding of disputed amounts except for manifestly patent and erroneous amounts or invoices. Number 3, which is if an invoice is not disputed within 90 days after payment, it is deemed to be accepted, final and binding to the buyer and seller. Number 20, which is the limitation on liability. Neither party shall be liable to the other in any event for loss of profits or for any indirect, special or consequential losses or damages, whether arising under tort, contract, or otherwise in respect of or in connection with this agreement. Number 21, which is dispute resolution. Subject to the provision of section on termination payment disputes and section with respect to the billing disputes, if any dispute or disagreement shall arise between the parties in connection with or arising out of this agreement, either party may request in writing that the prospective chief executive officers of the seller and the buyer meet within number of days and attempt to resolve the dispute. The number 22, which is the miscellaneous provision. This miscellaneous provision may include representation and warranties of the parties, title and risk of loss, indemnity, assignment and transfer, language, governing law or the Philippine law, notices, entire agreement, confidentiality, severability, survival, amendment, third-party rights, expenses, counterparts, partnership, waiver, and further acts and assurance. Number 23, which is the schedule and annexes. The annexes and schedule may include the following. Number 1, technical description or limits of the power plant. Number 2, contract quantities or contract capacity and or contract energy. Number 3, power rate and calculation of payments, contract price calculation or calculation of payment. Number 4, nomination and dispatch protocol. Number 5, details of the payment security. Number 6, which is the outage or may be included in contract quantities or so. Number 7, invoicing and payment procedure. Number 24, which is the annex for contract quantities. So, it is to provide contract quantities and pertinent definition of terms. Number 25, which is the annex for power rate and calculation of payment. It is to provide for the power rate and calculation. Sample calculation can be also included for reference purposes. Number 26, which is annex for nominations and dispatch protocols. So, annex for nomination, it is to provide for protocols, nomination, and dispatch. Note that the protocols may differ depending on whether the parties are operating in WESM or non-WESM regulatory environments. So that's all, and thank you for listening.